Hey, I want to talk about the skill of being productive. This is probably the hardest thing to be good at. Um, the difference on productivity between a pro and someone who's just pretty good or even really good is monstrous. Pros are obviously better at everything else, positioning, aiming, grenades, all of that. But people who are really good, just in general, are really good. They have good movement, they have good shots. Like all those other skills are way up there, but the productivity between someone really good and a pro is by far the biggest difference. So let's get into talk about what it is and why it matters. This is one of the hardest things to talk about objectively. Productivity shows up in every stat of the game, not directly, but you'll have more kills, more damage, less deaths, more flag. Like all of this is related to productivity. Um, but it's not one straight thing, right? Like it's not aiming. Productivity isn't how many shots do you hit versus miss. So this is as concise as I could make it. Is making plays that result in the largest advantage for your team. Um, you make decisions constantly throughout the game, and you have to make the decision that basically has you doing the most. Um, I've sort of narrowed this down into four questions as best I could, and sort of how I think about when making a decision. Most of these come naturally at this point. I'm not sitting there like actively reading this in my head. But these are things that you should be considering either when you're reviewing VODs or if you have some downtime for whatever reason. Like if you're respawning, this should be things you're thinking about. Eventually, you won't have to read them out in your head. These won't be things that you're um, going down a checklist on. It may be useful when you're learning to do that, but when you're on respawn or when you're walking from one place to another, you need to be assessing, is this the right thing to do or what's my plan in the next few seconds? And these, I think, will help figure out how to be more productive in your games. So the first one is, what do you need now? Like, what does your team need you to do now? And what is this accomplishing in the next 10 seconds of the game state? Um, the game is always moving. Like, flow changes, you gain and lose map control, objectives get pulled, weapons respawn, your team dies, their team dies. Things are always changing, so you need to know how to be productive now. And then while doing that action, you have to set yourself up to be productive later. Um, the three biggest things for this for me are if you don't have map control, you have to retake it. If you don't have map control, you can't do anything. So if your team needs to retake map control, that is your top priority. There are minor decisions that come into that for how you do that, but if you don't have map control, you need map control. Um, Very closely related to map control is controlling objectives, rocket spawn, snipe spawn, um, running a flag that was pulled, oddball control, hill control, um, even more subjective things like parts of the map are objectives. I don't know if you remember P3 from the Heretic game. P3 is a map objective. The slideshow's being super weird. Sorry about that. But if you don't immediately have to take map control, you have to control objective if one's coming up that's important. Related to those are spawns. If you have map control and there isn't an immediate objective to control, um, is the other team respawning? The answer is almost always yes. But if you can, how can you control their spawns? Do you block a spawn? Do you look at a spawn? Do you help a teammate kill someone who's spawning? So these are sort of the more overarching things that are always happening that you need to be aware of. Retaking map control if you don't have it, controlling objectives, and spawns. Those are the three big ones that I came up with where these are always happening. And you have to make sure your team is doing these things and helping your team have advantage in them. Um, so where's your team need help is more of a micro decision. Macro, micro from the position talk is always going to come up. There's always overarching things to be doing with generic in-game skills and more micro stuff in the second decisions. These are more in the second stuff. Like if you're walking towards an objective, say you're walking towards P3 on Heretic, if your friend gets in a fight at car 3 and you can shoot to help them, you should do that while you're going to P3. Um, So if there's a gunfight that you can help with now, you probably should. There's always obviously different ways to do this, and sometimes you can't do this, and sometimes there's more important things to do. But if there is one to help in, you should probably help in it. Um, Related to map control is the objective. Um, is there an objective that's on the map now that needs to be controlled? Is overshield coming up in 5 seconds? Is the other team 4 dead and you have to pull a flag? Is oddball respawning and you need to get top mid or guardian to pull ball? There's almost always an objective, and if you can help your team secure that objective, you should. Sometimes it's not directly. Sometimes controlling an objective is controlling a spawn. If you're in sword on pit and you have the team 4 dead and you have someone jumping out green to their plat to pull a flag, you don't need to go pull a flag. That's putting some people on flag, and that's not as advantageous for your team as you looking at court for court spawns or looking at needle for needle spawns. So there may be an objective for your team, but if your teammate is doing the literal map objective, there's another thing for you to be doing that's more advantageous. 3 people pulling a flag isn't useful. You need 1 person run a flag, and that's it. So if your team's doing it, find something else that you can do that's important. In this case, with the pit example, the objective is looking at spawns. If your teammates are looking at spawns and no one's pulling flag, go pull a flag. If the other team is 4 up, don't pull a flag. You'll die. Go help your team do something else with an objective. Is OS coming up in 15 seconds? You probably get bridge control to get OS, right? So there's always stuff to be doing, and figuring out what you should be controlling is super important. Related to objectives or map positions to control, if there's nothing game influential coming up, like if OS spawned 20 seconds ago, it's 3-on-3, snipes and rockets are already up and not coming up, most of it's going to be map positioning, right? You can't pull a flag with their whole team alive. You can't push a power position in Slayer with their whole team alive. So there should be something on the map that you can work towards that would give your team an advantage. In Heretic, it's Pink Tower, or maybe you have to get like your car bubble to defend your base from car pushes. Like there are things to be doing. The map position is more of the neutral game. It comes up a lot, but it's the least exciting of the 3. These usually come in order top down, as well as this last slide with map control objectives. Like these are all sort of top down priority. The top stuff that's how you win games. Specifically, like if you kill more people in Slayer, you win the game. There's an objective for a flag. Like 3 flag caps is how you win the game, but that comes from map control. So you should always be doing whatever helps your team the most. So if there's no flag to pull, or if it's not a good time to pull a flag, you should do something else. So hopefully those give you an idea of like where to move. And these are things that you should be thinking about constantly. You can do these while you're doing other things. Like retaking map control and playing an objective, you can move towards these things while you're doing other stuff. So if like, I guess not retaking map control, but if you're going to take P3 because no one's there, you can shoot car on your way. You can help your friend while you're going. Which, relating back to what I was saying at the start, why pros are so good is they can do a lot of these things at the same time. So try to bundle these as much as you can. You'll do a lot better. So there's nothing your team needs you to do, as in you don't need to retake map control. You don't need to pull a flag. You don't have to help in a fight. Like say it's 3 dead on their team on Slayer. It's not a whole lot of objectives to do if you have map control. So you have to think about what the other team's doing. If the other team has room to go places, you need to be ahead of them on where they're going. Like what are their objectives and how can you prevent them from taking those objectives? These help a lot in the map control and macro positioning aspect of it, because if you know where the other team is going, and if you watch the positioning video, you know how much I talked about options, you can make the best decision for your team to make the other team have the hardest time possible in the game. So if OS is coming up for the team, they have to retake map control. Having OS would really help them do that. So you don't want to give them overshield. Again, if OS is coming up, the team's going to be going there. They need that. If rockets are up in 20 seconds, they're going to be controlling wherever rockets spawn on whatever map you're on. If it's not an even game and you have map control and they're 4 dead, they're going to be spawning somewhere. If the other team 4 dead, you should have time to get map control before they spawn, and then you need to control their spawns and know where they're spawning. In most Halo games, you have a lot of influence over where they spawn, either by blocking it, mostly by blocking it. There's some just general map and game knowledge for how spawns work. Like in Halo 3, they tend to rotate around the map. They're not going to spawn court 4 times in a row. The game will eventually spawn them needle or in flag. But if the other team is on respawn and you have map control to look at their spawns, keeping their team dead is how you win games. There's obviously more to it, but what this says up here, exerting pressure, if you're at an advantage in map control and in game state, you need to put pressure on the team. If you let them just retake map control for free, you're going to lose the game. So these are 3 general things to think about when your team has an advantage for how to keep that advantage going. And then the last thing, if you're losing, whether a fight or the whole game, sometimes you just have to die. Dying sucks, but sometimes you have to do it. Like, if you're playing King of the Hill, and it's the 250, it's 240 to 245, and the team's in the hill, you have to kill the guy in the hill. You don't have a choice. They get 5 seconds, they win the game. It doesn't matter if you die, you lost the game. So you have to think about what the other team is doing and whether or not contesting what they're doing is worth you dying. Sometimes it is. There's a lot of times this is true. That said, there's a lot of times where not dying is the most important thing you can do. The 2 standout things for these for me are, if you can not die long enough, can you just not die at all? Which is huge. Whether it's the other team not be able to control your spawn, whether it's them not be able to pull a flag because instead of having 3 dead, they have 2 dead. That's a big deal. In Slayer, if you win 50 to 49 because you didn't die once, then you won the game. But it's also important to realize if you're delaying, if you're ever going to have the chance to turn this around. Like if you ran into their base on Heretic or Midship and your team is dead too, so it's like 7 dead for whatever reason, and you're one shot top their base, they're just going to spawn and kill you. It's a bad example because they should be shooting you, but the general idea is like there are situations where delaying your death just isn't really going to do a whole lot, and sometimes there's more effective things you could be doing other than sitting behind a rock getting your shields back. It's usually not the case. Not dying is really, really, really good. So if you can not die, you almost always should. But relating back to this point, if there's something else you could be doing, sometimes you have to die for it. But if you can talk to your team and they can come help you, don't die. It's going to be great. And then sometimes you're going to die, like up here, but it's not directly shooting the thing that's helping. You may not be the one that can test the objective, but if you can stay alive long enough that the other team has to commit to killing you, whether they're getting out of position or just wasting time and not protecting other parts of the map, your team can do useful things. Whether it's them not being able to prevent your team from taking OS or like I was talking about with the flag, if it's 3-on-2 instead of 3-on-1, they can't really pull a flag. This obviously changes depending on where people are standing, but delaying the other team from moving on objectives while your team's respawning gives you more time for your friends to get in positions to prevent the other team from doing stuff. I mean, that in general for me sums up how I think about productivity. It's a lot, and I'd recommend going through and sort of making a list like this for yourself, where you have a checklist of things that you're running through, usually on respawn or when not a whole lot is going on. You need to realize where you can be that gives your team the most advantage. So whether you're helping your friends, helping objectives, you should be doing as much of that at the same time as possible. Again, it's really hard. There's a reason people are pro at this game. There's a reason I'm not a pro at this game. And it's mostly down to this. Like, you can LPR people as much as you want, but if you're LPRing people in like your pit on pit, you're not doing a whole lot because you're not in a good position. You're not moving to a good position. It's really, really hard to be good at this. It's also something that people don't talk about a lot, right? Like, this isn't flashy. This isn't something that you obviously need to work on. If you're losing aiming battles, people are like, how do I get better at aiming? Obviously that matters. Or like, how do I strafe better? Like, if you look at all these searches or questions on forums for people asking how to get better, this never comes up. People don't ask, how do I be more productive? It's not a real tangible thing for most people, and it's one of the most important. I don't know how much you guys watch YouTube or Twitch or streams or even just hear people in game. People like to complain about their teammates not doing anything. Like, this guy's useless. This guy doesn't do shit. Like, why isn't my team helping? It's productivity. If you're sitting bottom mid on whatever map with a shotgun, you're not being productive. It's not a useful place to be. You're not dying and you might get a kill, cool, but you spend, 40 seconds sitting bottom mid doing nothing? You might as well be dead. A lot of this plays into teamwork as well. I don't know how much you've noticed from these slides, but a lot of it's like, how can I help my friends do things? My friend's pulling a flag, how can I protect him? How can I help turn a BR fight? Like, where can I be that I can see the most of the map, where I can make life easiest for my team and make the other team's life hardest? It's not about getting kills. It's not about how do I go plus 40 in a game. That'll happen if you're doing this, by the way, because if you're not dying, you can see the whole map and shoot it. You're going to get a ton of kills, a ton of assists, and not a whole lot of deaths. But that's not because you're out BRing people. It's not because you have better grenades than people. It's because you're in good positions and you're doing stuff to help. That's kind of why, tying back to the beginning, I said this shows up in every stat. It's because if you're being productive, you're always doing shit. If you're not doing something in the game, you're not useful. It's kind of harsh, but I mean, this is how you get good, is thinking about how to be productive. So if you're watching your VODs, like if you go back and watch Theater Mode, or if you watch someone else on Twitch, try to think about what decisions are being made and why. You can almost always tie them back to things in this list. Generally it's map control or pulling a flag or looking into spawn. And there's multiple ways to do all of that, right? Like, if you think about pit, if they're spotting their court, which is like the ideal situation, is you have 4 dead, you have a guy at needles, you have a guy at green, you have a guy in sword, and you force them to spawn courtyard, you're going to get that cap. But standing like top their tower isn't good there. Like, it's only good if your team is individually all way better than the team. Because top tower gives you a really hard shot on court spawns. It might block some court spawns where they'll spawn flag behind your team if they're on staggered spawns. But if you're setting sword, you can just look at their spawn with a sniper. It's essentially a flat plane, so you just leave it at head height and they can't strafe out of it. Sword can see their plat, it can see their needle, it can see their green, it can see all the way through their trained along. Like, you can see everything from sword, you can do it safely, as opposed to top tower. Like, you can kind of see that, but it's really easy to get pressured. Your shots on court aren't very easy. They're easy with a BR, but BR kills are a lot slower. So like, knowing where to be the most productive is really, really hard. I think I'm going to leave it there. I don't know if you've watched any of the other videos I've done, but I put some gameplay in the position 1 in the slideshow section of it. I didn't really like it. I think I like the format of doing this so you guys know what I'm talking about, and then grabbing VODs and doing sort of like clip reviews on how it relates back to this stuff. So hopefully I can do one of those soon, but I wanted to get this down because, again, no one talks about this, but it's super important. I think that's about it. I hope you learned something, If not, sorry I wasted your time. If you did, awesome. That's about it. Thanks, everyone.